Welcome to The Writing Life, the podcast for anyone who writes. I'm Holly.
And I'm Steph. And we're joining you from the National Centre for Writing at Dragon Hall in Norwich.
Our very own UNESCO City of Literature.
Summer is in full swing here at NCW, and we'll be welcoming lots of people through our doors in the summer months, including lots of people who will be getting married here, which is very romantic and very lovely. Mm-hmm. But we also have lots of bookish delights coming up as part of our own NCW programme. Holly, is there anything in particular that you are looking forward to in the next few weeks?
Oh, yeah, thanks for queuing me up there, because I really am looking forward to an event we have next week on Thursday, the 11th of July, which is a little bit different to our usual style of event, because this is a musical offering from the Bookshop Band, which is going to be hopefully a warm, lovely summery evening. And this is the brilliant Ben and Beth from the Bookshop Band, who are celebrating the release of their 14th studio album, which has been produced by and features the legend that is Pete Townsend, which is very cool.
Very cool.
Name of the album is Emerge Return, and some of their new songs that they'll be performing have been inspired by authors and books including Margaret Atwood, Philip Pullman, Robert Macfarlane, and they're going to do 2 sets for us, and be drinks, chance to have a drink and chill out in the garden in between. I think it's going to be so fun and atmospheric up in Dragon Hall with live acoustic music. So very much looking forward to that.
Yeah, me too. We hosted the Bookshop Band many years ago at Dragon Hall, and they were an absolute blast. They were lovely people and a brilliant performance. So I'm really looking forward to this too. As you say, it is taking place at Dragon Hall on Thursday, the 11th of July. Tickets are available now on our website. So head to nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk and click the What's On button to reserve your space.
We should get back to today's episode though. So today we are delighted to welcome scriptwriters Stephen Keyworth and James McDermott. And they are here for a conversation about the craft and industry of writing for long-running radio or TV series, so commonly known as soaps.
Soap operas. So Stephen Keyworth is an award-winning director and writer who has worked extensively as a director in theatre and written over 60 hours of television, film and radio. His Doctor's episode, The Joe Pasquale Problem, was shortlisted for the Writers Guild of Great Britain Awards, and his Radio 4 adaptation of The Man Who Fell to Earth can be currently heard on BBC Sounds.
James McDermott is a writer based in East Anglia. He graduated from the University of East Anglia with an MA in scriptwriting and a first-class BA honours in scriptwriting and performance. James has written multiple episodes of the BBC One soap opera EastEnders, and he's written plays for BBC Radio 4. His short films include Claws, which was nominated for Best East Anglian Film at Norwich Film Festival 2023.
I feel like EastEnders and Doctors are sort of British soap opera royalty, really. So we really are in the hands of experts here. Stephen and James's discussion covers their personal journeys into writing for soaps, the process of writing a script, and the power of humour in this kind of writing. They also touch on life as a freelance writer, the importance of structure in a writing routine, and what they were able to learn from watching the episodes back that they wrote for.
Yeah, so this is going to be ideal for anyone with an interest in script writing, but particularly in those long-running series, which are so unique to the British TV scene.
They really are. So without further ado, let's hand over to Stephen and James.
Hi, James. Hello.
Hello, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm going to get over the surrealness of this kind of process in a couple of minutes, I'm sure. We've met once in the real world a few weeks ago, didn't we, at the Ink Festival? Did you have a good festival there?
Yeah, we did. If people in East Anglia are listening, they might know of Ink Festival. It's a short play festival predominantly, but a festival of new writing in Halesworth. And yes, we met in April, if I remember right, and we were chatting about continuing drama, knowing we were going to do this podcast. And a specific continuing drama we were talking about was Doctor Who as well, which I suppose could count as a continuing drama Because it's been going 60 years.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive. I think that beats the rest of them, doesn't it? I don't know where Coronation Street fits.
I think it's probably exceeded that, if memory serves, or is certainly close to 60 years, but I could be wrong.
I guess it had a decade or two off, so maybe it hasn't quite got the Guinness World Record yet. So yeah, we're going to talk about continuing drama today. I wanted to ask you how you got started in writing generally, and then how you ended up writing for EastEnders, because you've done 3 or 4 episodes now?
I'm currently writing the 5th at the minute, but I think 3 or 4 will have gone out at the moment. Yeah, so in terms of how I started writing, I grew up in the 90s in Lincolnshire and was quite a solitary child. I was quite social at school, but I didn't really want to see friends outside of school. I enjoyed seeing them then, and at home I would retreat into stories, really. I watched a lot of TV, I watched a lot of kids' TV, and my parents and grandparents were huge fans of sitcoms like Dinner Ladies or Only Fools and Horses. And from a really young age, I remember watching videos that we had of those sitcoms, and at the weekend when we go out shopping, I'd ask for a little treat, and that would usually be a second-hand comedy video from a charity shop in Lincolnshire. And so I would watch those shows and feel compelled, I suppose, to write what was fan fiction. I'd write my own episodes or storylines for these sitcoms, for these dramas, and act them out in the garden. Wrote my brother into acting them out with me sometimes. And so I think it was predominantly sitcoms, and then as I got a little bit older, it became crime dramas, actually. I really got obsessed with Agatha Christie and Midsummer Murders and those kind of things. So whilst I was watching soaps alongside that, I wasn't necessarily writing those in terms of the fan fiction. But that idea of continuing drama, hanging out with regular returning characters, wanting to join in that conversation they were having, I suppose, by writing my own stories for them, was something I was doing from a young age. How did you start out?
It's not a dissimilar beginning, actually. I was a solitary child in Nottinghamshire. I watched a lot of sitcom. I remember, I think Hello Hello still stands up, actually, but Only Fools and Horses and all that kind of thing. Yeah. And they later Friends when I was going off to university. Yeah, my fan fiction was Danger Mouse. There were puppet versions. Yeah, right. With Ian, who lived next door. And then I kind of, I did well on my GCSEs and all of that sort of stuff. And I went off to do a drama degree. And I think I wanted to be an actor at that point. And at some point I remembered I was good at the writing part, or better at the writing part than the acting part. So I started writing kind of monologues, funny monologues for myself at a university in Manchester.
I had such a similar experience with, again, growing up in Lincolnshire and not really having family or friends or neighbours in the business. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I didn't know you could go and be a writer. And I had a really good media teacher who said, go to uni, pursue comedy. And so I went wanting to write sketch comedy initially. And then I remember studying people like Alan Bennett and Pinter. Yeah. And feeling absolutely captivated by theatre and more, as you say, kind of more comfortable writing than acting. I remember doing a few stand-up gigs in pubs in Norwich, and some went well and some didn't. And I don't think I had the skin that was thick enough for that kind of performing. I still wanted to write and be up there in essence, if you like, maybe in the mouths and minds of other people as a writer instead of having to perform myself. I
had a really good maths teacher who kept writing to me while I was doing my drama degree and telling me to stop and go and study maths instead. My swerve into drama was very much a last-minute swerve when my A-levels were slightly different to what was expected, but I think it was completely the right choice. And I wrote, then did a postgrad in writing, and then was putting on plays in Manchester. And then, also tried stand-up, which I loved for, you could come up with an idea in the morning, test it out in the evening. Yeah. And I love that sort of, I always say it's dangerous sports for unfit people, essentially. It's the kind of adrenaline involved in that. But that led to me writing a sitcom, or from doing theatre, I got an agent at the Edinburgh Festival. And then I thought, well, I'll try and write one of those sitcoms that I was watching when I was a kid. And
I've never done that yet. I haven't found that pull towards writing a sitcom. I think someone asked me recently in a kind of Q&A thing, they said, what would you love to write in the future? And I think if I left the planet having not had a go at writing a sitcom, I'd be disappointed. But strangely, considering it's a thing I was raised on that started me writing, I just haven't been pulled towards writing one. And maybe that is linked to that idea of I have it on such a pedestal, that situation comedy, that I won't go near it until I think, I'm really ready. I don't know, it still feels really special, an art form to me that I'm maybe not too ready to tamper with it yet.
I know. I'd really like to have a go at a studio sitcom, and because those are the ones I grew up with, and those are the ones you kind of really felt for. And then how did you end up in writing for EastEnders, I guess?
So I had a play on at the Park Theatre in Finsbury Park in London in February and March 2020, and I can't recall if someone from BBC Writers Academy came to see it or whether I submitted the script for one of their open window submissions. But I remember talking to BBC Writers Academy over lockdown and being interviewed about joining their Writers Academy. And I got longlisted and then shortlisted, and I think I got down to like the final 10. And if you got a place on that scheme at that time, I think the structure of the scheme has changed now. You get to write an episode of EastEnders, Casualty, Holby, Doctors, and develop your own TV idea. And I really, really wanted that scheme. It felt like a real step in the right direction and a way to reach the world of television that I couldn't without doing that scheme. And I didn't get a place. I got shortlisted but didn't get a place, and I was really, really gutted by it. And I think about 2 weeks after getting the rejection email, I got another email saying a big part of why you didn't get it is because you seemed more invested in EastEnders than other TV shows that you could have written on as part of that scheme. And then they said, if that interest is there, we can pop you in touch with the EastEnders team. So I started having a chat there and did what's called a shadow script, where I was mentored through the writing of an episode that wouldn't be broadcast. I was given storylines and asked to write the shadow script. And from there, that went well, and I ended up getting my first commission on the show. So I think it was linked to, again, having that play on, sending it into the BBC.
I went through, having written a couple of sitcom scripts, I sent stuff to the writers' room at the BBC at the time, and that led to, I had a couple of interviews to get into EastEnders. And I think I didn't want it enough. Or in the room, I wasn't able to of course, it'd be so exciting to write for EastEnders, and it was when I finally got to do it. But at the time, they would ask you, why do you want to write for EastEnders? And I would say, I think it's just really interesting to write a show where there's all the same characters and you can and I was very speaking from the head. So I got turned down twice. And then the Writers Academy came around, and I'd written a radio play for Radio 4, having done, which I got from doing a lot of Edinburgh festivals, and I met a producer and we pitched this thing, which is a romantic comedy essentially. And so I entered that, and I had to write a page about why I desperately wanted to write for EastEnders. And I took I took Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream as I thought, I've got to do it. It's got to be about passion for the shows. And I kind of talked a lot about growing up in Sneinton and Nottingham and the kind of market and family being working class, and then totally blowing it to go middle class, so that for my level. So I really kind of sold the passion, and I did get busted in the interview for not watching Doctors. That was the out of the four. It was the same for me as it was when you applied. I guess it was Doctors, EastEnders, Casualty, and Holby that you'd be working on. I managed to get a place and go through that, which was great. I didn't really believe in writing structure before that point. I thought it was all instinct and go with your gut. And
absolutely.
13 weeks, I was completely converted.
I think I teach part-time at UEA and teach script writing there, and I can't stress that enough to people who are listening, and again, those students, that TV writing feels like it is governed by structure. Trying to, that really crass level of don't turn over, don't turn off. How do we keep your attention with a well-structured story? But also, if you're not writing for BBC, often you're writing for ad breaks where you've got to have a hook, which is going to pull people back in 4 minutes after they've made their cup of tea. But also, the weaving together of so many storylines demands so much forethought and internal architecture that to not plan or to not structure that work in a sophisticated way can really, really hinder that writing process. And again, if people are interested in that Writers Academy, I think it's now stopped. But there's the person who did run it, a wonderful writer and teacher called John York, wrote a fantastic book called Into the Woods, which I used to teach with at UEA and read when I was a student of script writing at UEA. I was consoled when I didn't get a place on that course by saying so much of the gold that you would get from those writing rooms is in that book by John. So I really can't recommend it enough if people are interested in learning about television or writing for television, and certainly structuring continuing drama. I think that book was a real map for me when I was trying to learn how to write for TV.
Yeah, John very conveniently has read everything. He's read all of the other screenplay books. He's seen everything. I don't know how he ever slept, honestly, but he would kind of distilled it all into the course, which then became the book. So that way, shortcut is read John's book because he's read everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What were your first impressions of working on the show? What was it like going in there for the first time?
I think I couldn't get over the idea when I was writing the first draft that millions of people would watch it, because I predominantly work as a playwright where you're used to begging people to come and see your play and buy a ticket. And even if the play sells out, a couple of thousand people might see it. So I really, really struggled with that thought of, oh my goodness, I'm writing something for the BBC, this place where I'd watched loads of those sitcoms that I was growing up adoring. I'm writing for some iconic characters that I've grown up watching and helped me come out or help me understand what camp was, all of those great things that soap can do. But that main thing of millions of people will watch this and it will live on iPlayer for a year. I really, really struggled in that first episode to forget the stakes of the job and really, really lose myself in the writing of it. I think by episode 3, I know I'm on my 5th, I think that had really, really abated, but it was still there. And part of me likes that it's still there. I want it to be exciting, and I'm still really excited to be doing it. And I hope I never lose that with any job, really. I still get excited walking in a theatre and think, oh my goodness, I've got a play on in here. That was the kind of feeling I remember being overriding when I first started, that, oh my goodness, this is EastEnders and lots of people will watch it. How did you feel when you first started doing it?
I mean, that's so true. I mean, we had being on the Academy, we had a tour of the set, and we kind of wandered around Albert Square and into all of the cafe and all of these places, and that was quite something that was very exciting. And then when you sat down writing the script, I think I coped with it by putting in jokes. Essentially, I was like, I'm confident I can do jokes. So if there's a funny thing in this scene, I think I'm doing okay. But it was really special. I guess I got to do Keith and Mickey's exit scene with that shaggy dog they had. Yeah. Whose name momentarily escapes me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I want to say Gus or Genghis or something like that.
Genghis. It's absolutely Genghis. Yeah, it's intimidating, but exciting to sort of play with those kind of chess pieces and move them around. And
absolutely. I think when I've talked about it with other people, that is the phrase I keep going back to, that kind of privilege of getting to play with other people's toys, in that sense that you don't want to break them. You kind of want to look after the characters, but also it's a great way to learn how you might make your own toys for your own TV show. I find that a great part of working on soap as well. And funny you say jokes was the way of getting through it. I feel similar. I thought part of the reason I got the job, I suppose, is that I could write relationships and write humorous relationships. But if he doesn't mind me saying, he writes Jonathan Harvey, writes on Corrie, gave me a really good bit of advice when I started. I asked him, do you have any advice for writing soap? And he said, yeah, don't put a flag in it. Don't put a flag in your episode. Just try and write a really good EastEnders episode. Bring your voice to it. Don't try and make it the James McDermott show because you're nervous. And it was always that dance between how do you get as much of your voice and the humour in as possible and put your stamp on an episode, but also really try and respect those other toys you're playing with, other people's toys you're playing with. Make sure the characters sound the same and the story is what's driving things, not the jokes. But I remember doing exactly the same thing. And if I can give Sharon a really witty line, I've got a anchor in this scene now. I know that I can work my way through it.
I've just remembered a moment in my interview, which was the exec of Doctors at the time, and John York was there, and I don't completely remember the other two people in the room, possibly Kerry Merrick. But John was looking out of the window for the first part of my interview, and he didn't seem. And then it started talking about EastEnders and what EastEnders should be, and what I thought of the show and when it really works. And I said that I thought it was in a kind of grey place, as it was at the time, that everybody was kind of the same, and what you wanted was good people doing bad things and bad people doing good things. You needed to push people and have kind of black and white and to really send people on kind of journeys. And that was that point where John York looked back from whatever was outside and kind of was engaging. He was obviously listening very intently the whole way through, but that was the point where I thought, okay, maybe I've got this. Because I think that kind of appealed to what his kind of idea of the show should be. It has a reputation sometimes of being miserable, but I think it can be great when it sort of really kind of stretches its characters.
Yeah, I love that thought. I think that's kind of good people doing bad things, and it's not linked to soap, but I remember someone saying to me about writing stories that your protagonist is as good as the antagonist, that they've got to force the protagonist to do bad things for the right reasons for them. And I think that feels like part of the joy of writing soap as well, that you're writing everyday people making the wrong decisions, which we all do sometimes in our lives, but obviously drama will turn it up to 11. Someone said to me about soap as well, I can't remember who it was, that it's about writing strong women and weak men. And that's really stayed with me as well, that you're writing the matriarchs, you're writing these fantastic stories driven by powerful women, and you've got the kind of weaker men making bad decisions that women have got to clean up after. And I think that certainly feels true of Corrie, an old school Corrie, and certainly something like EastEnders and The Six, which is happening at the minute. I think that's something that rattles around my head when I'm working or watching EastEnders as well.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about your process of writing a script. What do you do first? How do you start?
For continuing drama?
For continuing drama, yeah. That's why we're here, yeah.
So normally we'll be given a story document containing details of what storylines have got to feature in the episode. So I will normally break that down into scenes. So take all those storylines and break them down into scenes, weave those scenes together into what's called a beat sheet. And if people aren't familiar with that idea of beats, I suppose it's just a unit of change in the story, a unit of conflict, of action, of change, just so you can see the journeys that the characters are going on and how they're broken down into scenes. And from there, I will usually then begin a first draft. And I always think that first draft of anything, but certainly continuing drama, is me telling myself the story. Just pop in the story on the paper so I've got something to shape. And then subsequent drafts, I'm thinking about how am I telling this story to the audience now? How can I cut stuff that feels too overt? How can I turn stuff up that feels too quiet or too subtle? How can I add in the jokes? How can I add in the subtext? How can I add in the business so characters aren't just stood on screen talking to each other? What are they doing in the scene physically? They're the things I'm thinking about. And I think it's important to stress again with handing in a piece of continuing drama, the first draft of that, or any script, my first draft to hand in is never the first draft. It's probably about draft 3 because I've thought about those things on it. Again, the business of a scene, the subtext, the jokes, you don't really want to hand in that kind of messy draft straight away. So yeah, to summarise, it will be breaking it down into storylines, writing that first draft, and then polishing, finessing that first draft, which is probably my draft 3, but will be handed in as my first draft on the record, I suppose. Is your process similar?
It is. I guess we were sort of taught to break it down into A, B, C stories, sometimes D and E. In EastEnders, you get a little story about Mo trying to buy a hat or something, and you kind of so I break down each story into 5 acts. John York is very much a 5-act man, and what that gives you is essentially just kind of more twists on a very kind of plain level rather than 3-act. In a 3-act structure, the middle act can get a bit baggy, so it made a lot of sense to me. So I kind of break each story down into beats and scenes, and then I kind of have them on sort of separate documents, and then I cut them up, and I have this big board in my office, and I kind of arrange them, and they're all color coded, and then I just arrange them on that essentially, and it's a fairly. I like it because you can just see, I've not had a red scene for a while. I need to move a red scene up there. We've lost that story. So yeah, it's a lot of kind of working out of what the story is, and then how you interject them is cut and paste. And ideally in EastEnders, you want a scene that has 3 colours in it, that it's not just doing one thing. You're kind of crashing stories together. Yeah,
absolutely.
And there was a writer who came to speak to us as well on the Writers' Academy, and I can't remember his name for the life of me, which is very annoying because he was on EastEnders and he was very important for quite a time, and he brought Shane Ritchie into the show. He's called Tony, I believe. But Tony Jordan.
Yeah.
Gosh, yes. Who is eerily similar to Shane Ritchie when you meet him in the flesh. he said he starts with, what is my most important scene? And then he kind of he's a lot more kind of instinctive, except he has this important scene, and then he works out where it's going to go in the episode. Is it the end? Is it the beginning? Is it, wherever? I'd sort of do that, and I look for the ending as well. What is the ending? What is the most important scene? And what is the fun scene? What is the scene that I do? What is no one else is going to have this interesting scene? Where's my scene going to go?
I love that thought of starting with that most important scene as the first port of call when you're thinking about the episode. I think what I find useful as well when writing EastEnders, but also writing anything, and certainly helping students write their own screenplays, is just making sure that every storyline's got a little bit of a different tone so you can cut to something else. Because if you've just got 10 scenes that all feel tragic, you've got this monotonous, repetitive tone across your episode. So having a really dark A story, a really funny B story, emotional C story, thinking about orchestrating the episode like that, you wouldn't just want to listen to drums for 30 minutes. You wouldn't just want to listen to a triangle for 30 minutes. Where can you bring in different sounds, different tempos? Is something I really, really think about when editing and when marking as well, when marking other people's work. And certainly plays too, because you're writing a live event, you're writing a night out. You don't want that room that play is in to feel the same in terms of energy for 2 hours.
Yeah.
So how can we cut to different things to create different energies is something that I think about a lot.
I mean, I've written over 70 episodes of Doctors now, or that'll be the number it stops at, obviously, because the show's gone now. But
it's going,
it's a real shame. It's on for the rest of this year, but it's a real the types of the stories you could tell, because primarily every episode is a story of the day. And that meant you could go to a lot of kind of very diverse and interesting places.
Absolutely. I fell in love with it when I was researching the shows, ready for that Writers' Academy interview. I'd never really watched it, and then spent most of my lockdown watching all the soaps. But I remember feeling like that with Doctors, that because of that almost story of the week quality to every episode, where you've got brand new characters from all walks of life, because of the time it went out, it felt like it could take risks as well. It didn't have to worry too much about keeping an audience at 7 o'clock at night when there's so much competition.
Yes.
It's just, what do we want to say? How do we want to say it? Let's say that then. I loved that swagger and political power of the show. So it's such a shame that that is being lost.
Yeah. I mean, it was a show. We weren't explicitly allowed to be political, but also we had to show this country that we live in. So it was political in the end. It was about underfunding and the madness of universal credit assessments. And it had all of this sort of stuff in. And I often got brought in as the funny one to, if we've been a bit dark for a couple of episodes, let's put Steve in there. And then occasionally I'd mess with them and go, no, I'm going to do a really angry one this week. This is it's just a howl of despair. You weren't expecting that. A couple of jokes, but it's a shame. It's a real shame that it's gone, because it was, you could, and you would watch it and you would not necessarily, every episode would not be for you, but it had such range, I think. Yeah,
and it was such a great training ground for writers and directors and actors. So many people's early credits as an actor is in Doctors, or was in Doctors. So many huge actors today started there. I've met so many writers and directors since working in continuing drama myself that have had their breaks or their training in Doctors. So as well as the kind of losing that wonderful platform for telling a certain type of story in the afternoon on primetime television, it's also losing another training ground for people who want to start out.
Just to say, because it used to be that writing for shows like Doctors and Holby and Casualty, you would be the emphasis is on the story of the day. So the writer would come in on Casualty and Holby, you would come into a room and you would pitch the story that you've worked out. What are your guest characters? And that I enjoyed that. I was terrifying, but telling a story to a room and trying to bring them on board. I did my first Casualty. I wanted to crash essentially the Coca-Cola Christmas lorry into a house just as somebody was taking down their Christmas decorations.
Oh, fantastic. What an image.
Yeah, and they were like, the room was like, yeah, come on, Steve, that's amazing. And then the budgetary things come in and you're crashing a van into a caravan.
Oh, God, okay.
But now, and then Doctors, you were doing that. You didn't get to be in the room. You would sort of write the pitch and send it in. But interestingly, Casualty has moved away from that now. So you don't pitch a story of the day. At the moment, it's as serial as EastEnders, essentially. It's very kind of worked out.
Was there logistical nightmares with Coca-Cola? I'm really curious about that story.
It would never have been a Coca-Cola thing on it, but it would have that essentially a big lorry with fairy lights on it and having that kind of vibe coming through the darkness.
So use it somewhere else. I think it's such a striking start to a show.
Absolutely. Oh, how about notes? So you put in the first draft, which is your third draft, and then talk about the note process at EastEnders.
Yeah, so it might be standard across other continuing dramas as well, but I think we do about 5 drafts, with each draft receiving notes, which is usually a Word document with notes for every different storyline, every different scene, and actioning those. And I think it feels different to receiving notes on plays, where those notes for my own plays, where I'm just receiving notes from one person, usually be that a dramaturg who will help shape a story, or the director. Those notes are often questions, and I will often have a long time to work them out and can find my own specific way through them. And whilst I can certainly find my own way through lots of notes on continuing drama, you're getting notes from more voices, and again, I'm playing with other people's toys, so those notes have probably got to be actioned in the way that's suggested to me. And I really like that. I know that can sound like it might feel a little prescriptive, but I love the community of making that episode together. I'm thinking, okay, these are the notes, these are the voices from people that know these characters and this world better than I do. How can we make this episode, this story, as strong as possible by hearing those voices and implementing those notes? And I like that lots of the problems are solved with other people as opposed to being a playwright predominantly, where you've got to solve most of those problems on the page yourself.
I think there are kind of levels of note as well. You get notes from, it all comes through your script editor, and there are notes that come from the script editor, and then there are different drafts go to different level of producers is the way it works.
Yes.
On most of the shows, I think. So the producer or the director gives the editor a note, and then they they pass it on to you. And sometimes you're looking for the note behind the note. There are kind of, with different editors, different personalities, there are some who would kind of solve it for you and say, cut this scene and make those two characters one person or something like that. And there are others, I like the editors where I guess you get to solve it your way, really. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's less work if they solve it for you, but you get to do it in a more interesting way, I think.
Yeah, I remember being on a writing course where a playwright and fantastic screenwriter called Lucy Preble came to talk to us, and she said to us, if people give you a note, the moment that they've identified as not working in the script probably doesn't work. But the reason they've said it's not working is probably not the reason it's not working. That's for you to find for yourself. Yeah. And the fix is for you to find for yourself. But if anyone reads anything, certainly TV or a play, and says that moment's not working, here's how you fix it, I will certainly always listen to that first bit of something's wrong here. It didn't move you in the way I wanted it to.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. The notes you prefer, the prompts you prefer are always the questions. And I try and give notes as questions as a teacher as well. Just ask what if more than do this, try this. So the writer feels they can work things out for themselves in their way, in their voice. At the end of the day, that's what matters most as well, that it all feels cohesive and like it's authored in the same voice. So trying to solve problems in your way through your creative processes feels most conducive to making it sound coherent and like it's come from the same mind.
Have you had any frantic last-minute rewrites yet? I had a couple of times where an actor was suddenly not available.
I don't think so. I think not last minute. I think along the process of some episodes, storylines have changed or actors have gone on leave. I've had that. And again, that feels like the most distinct aspect of writing for screen as opposed to writing for theatre, which feels far more slow and on the writer's time and terms. Whereas, you are a gun for hire on someone else's show and you know the deadlines, you know how long you have to write an episode and whatever notes come through, you have to implement them.
Are you good at managing your time, do you think? Because if you have a week to do your rewrite, are you disciplined?
I am. And it's one of those things that I think I've always been quite good at because I was in education for a long time. I didn't have a gap year, so I went straight from A-levels into a BA, into an MA. And then after the MA, I did loads of writing courses as a participant just to keep deadlines in my life. I feared I would really struggle to write if I didn't have infrastructure around me. And I think 10 years on from kind of leaving education, those schemes, that's still residually in me that I need a deadline to do something. Even if I haven't got a commission and I'm writing something for me, I will impose a deadline on that just so I get it done. So I feel that makes working on continuing drama really useful. And I think most people I know who work in continuing drama are good at timekeeping. Are you good at timekeeping? I
am. So. I do like a deadline. The deadline motivates you, but I think it's not necessarily consistently spread over the week. There's a no. It's like an opposite ski slope. It starts off quite gradual, and then it gets steeper and steeper and steeper as you head to the end of the amount of work that gets done. Yeah,
and I've learned as well that it's writing on TV is far more work and time than I ever thought it would be. I think when I started it, I thought, I know these shows, I know these characters, I can keep doing it alongside other projects, and it really does gobble up time. So I've learned to not try and write a play in a poetry book and teach a module whilst trying to write an EastEnders episode. And similarly, I think when you first start writing, you can internalise lots of other things people tell you about being a writer, which is you need to work every day, just as you might need to go to the gym every day to build a muscle, you need to do the same. And then life happens to you. I tried to do that to some extent and did in lockdown a lot, just to kind of stay sane. But certainly since lecturing, it's not fair on the students if I'm trying to cram in 3 hours of writing before I see them and they're getting the dregs of me because I'm knackered from giving all of my thought to a script. So it's just learning, as well as keeping time and keeping deadlines, learning to compartmentalise and think, yes, I've got some time today, but is today the best time to spend that time on writing? Or am I better served to not rush it and cram it and panic? Is the work going to be great if I behave like that? Probably not. So I think that feels like something that's happening recently in terms of how I'm handling deadlines. It's learning when to make time for other things, I suppose, as well as when to make time for writing.
I'm properly freelance at the moment, so I'm having to retrain myself to my working day. Essentially, I've got nobody giving me the deadlines to finish all of the stuff that I need to get finished.
Do you mind me asking if you're keeping like 9 to 5 hours? Is that helping, or are you carving out a morning or an afternoon?
I try to keep 9 to 5 hours. I've got an office in a building with a bunch of artists, and I go there. I like to sort of be separate.
I think that's such a good idea to go somewhere else bar the house to work, because I think someone said to me in lockdown, a playwright friend, that you're trying to create where you're paying your bills and loving your partner and seeing your family. If you do everything in the house, it can make that space really charged for other people. So having a workplace to go to as a freelance writer, I think is such a good idea if you can make that part of your life.
I find I solve things on the way home as well. You kind of, whatever you've done at the end of the day, you're like, oh, that's not quite it. And then on the way home, you'll work out what you should have done.
Yes. So I spend a lot of time in rural Norfolk. I used to live there and I moved to Norwich last year, but still go back a lot. And I feel exactly the same on walks, that if I'm struggling with a script, I will take a problem for a walk for an hour and let that kind of subconscious mind away from the glare and demand of a screen, work it out. So I think I agree. Having that commute, or the self-imposed commute of a walk, I suppose, is really, really useful too.
Are there things you've learned from watching your episodes go out about what you will do next time, or how? Yeah.
Even though I think I'm doing it sometimes, I think I can do this more, and that is always cutting the run up and cutting the sum up in a scene, just getting straight into the meat of the drama. So there's no kind of treading water in a scene. Someone, I think he's called Ashley Farrow, who used to write on EastEnders and then went on to write Life on Mars, but he talked about, in John Yorke's book, he was interviewed and said that what helped him write EastEnders was imagining the duff-duff drums at the end of every scene.
Yes.
And I find that really, really useful when I'm writing now, but certainly when I've watched other episodes, I thought, okay, if that scene was my duff-duff scene, it's not as punchy and as powerful as it could be. How can I attune that in further episodes without making a scene feel melodramatic? So I'm looking for that. I'm making sure that every scene has got that hook and that turning point, and I've learned to really watch for that. I remember a writer saying to me once, 7 or 8 years ago, they said to me, you make a joke in a script when you don't know what you're doing dramatically. Because you can make a joke, it will be your default, and you might be too scared to be a bit brave. And I certainly see that in all my work, not just TV work, but certainly plays and old poetry when I was writing more spoken word than page poetry, of just questioning the jokes, thinking, is this just a great line I want to make people laugh, or would the character say this at this moment to get something from somebody, to do something to somebody? Is that joke active beyond amusing the audience? That's something I'm really watching for, because I know a sense of humour is something I try to bring to soaps, but I'm always questioning it, thinking, is that my voice creeping in, or is that the character's voice making that joke? And am I in any way avoiding doing something braver in that scene?
It's true. Sometimes the joke is a tangent, and it kind of takes away from the energy and kind of focus of the scene, and you have to cut it.
I always get a little bit bristly about jokes, because lots of people in the theatre who work in the theatre, and certainly work with playwrights in the theatre, aren't that keen on jokes in plays, and it's something people always try and weed out first. But I think they're so powerful, certainly in theatre. If someone laughs at your joke, you know they've heard your point, felt it on a primal level and made a response. You know you've been heard and they've processed what you've got to say. And so I think it's a great way of keeping an audience and knowing they're being moved by something. Again, whether that's applicable for lots of scenes on TV, you've got your audience already, so you don't need to do that in quite the same way.
There's a lot of people talking about Boys from the Black stuff again at the moment, because the stage show and Bernard Hill dying not so long ago, and it's the use of comedy in the Yossa Hughes episode, which is kind of really powerful, and the thing that people remember, the sort of scene, and maybe I don't want to give it away, but the scene in the confession, the kind of use of kind of comedy there is a real. It's a punch, it's a release, it's sometimes it is. And those are the shows that I've always really loved, the sort of where there is comedy in the sort of darkest moments. An episode of Only Fools and Horses, where I think the two of them are trapped in a lift, and they talk about Rodney losing his child. There's a line which is just beautiful and heartbreaking and funny, and just says it all, the pain and everything, which is
that's the thing. I think when a joke is multitasking, when it's doing more than just being a surface laugh, then it's perfect, I think, and perfect for drama. And exactly as you said there with that great example of Only Fools and Horses, it's that lovely pressure valve that we take the audience on a journey, and then we release that tension and we move on to something else. And again, that's why I think humour is really powerful in plays as well, because it's a great way of controlling that energy in the room, of building tension, releasing tension, building it again. In short, to answer that question, I think that's something I really watch for on EastEnders. Why are my characters joking now? Is it because I want them to say this funny thing, or are they using that joke to do something, to multitask, to get something from someone in the scene?
Are there any scenes or stories you'd like to write for EastEnders? There was, I think it might have been Tony Jordan again, actually, that I think he said that he always wanted to have a scene where Peggy Mitchell shaves her son's heads. He was like, how do they get their heads shaved? And he just wanted to have that. Yeah.
What a lovely question, actually. If there's anything I'd love to write. I think
it's definitely the sort of question I should have given you advance, so that
no, it's a good question, and kind of putting me on the spot with it means that you get an honest, instinctive answer more than this really thoughtful one of, oh, what might I say that sounds interesting or smart for the show? What do I actually want to do? I think often think as well, because lots of those icons on the show, like Sharon and Phil, have been on the show for a very long time, and so they're in the very near future. They might want to leave the show 10, 20 years time max, I suppose. So writing the exit stories for those characters. How do we end Phil Mitchell's huge story? How do we end Sharon's huge story? I'd love to be a part of that, because we've spent more time with those characters than we've ever spent with Hamlet or Macbeth or Lear. We've seen so much, seen them go through so much. So for tying off a story for someone who's had such a mammoth epic unfold on television, that is something I'd love to be involved in. And my favourite character on EastEnders is Sharon. I absolutely love Letitia. I think she embodies exactly what I said about that strong women, weak man, ordinary, wonderful, recognisable, funny people, going through life, losing people, failing, trying. I think she's just such a strong, interesting, funny character. And so being involved in Sharon's exit story at some point in the future will be something I'd love to do on EastEnders. What about you? Is there any moment in any of the continuing dramas that you work on that you think, do you know what, I'd love to author that?
Well, I mean, I liked writing episodes for character Val Haskey in Doctors, because he used humour as a kind of defence mechanism, and he had that kind of Eulorian House kind of energy, I guess. And he's also kind of a very kind of lonely character, because and so I like those. There was a couple of times we did episodes where he kind of meets someone and he goes on a real kind of journey. Essentially, it's a kind of romantic comedy in an episode, but with a bit more kind of bite. And the actor Ian Midlane, he wrote an episode like that with a priest. Al is a massive kind of cynic and probably pro Dawkins, but he develops this relationship with somebody kind of very kind of unlikely. I guess it's those stories where you really get to send somebody on a journey. I'm all over the place on Netflix at the moment, watching all kinds of shows. So I don't have, now that Doctors has stopped, I'm still watching it, but I'm not, confidentially, nobody tell anyone, but I'm not watching the other shows at the moment. So I'm exploring the world outside. on Disney and Netflix, and some great stuff there. I'm really enjoying A Murder at the End of the World you mentioned Agatha Christie earlier on. It's a kind of contemporary bunch of people in a house, and there's a murder at the edge of the Arctic Circle, and it's got this very interesting kind of flawed, brilliant protagonist. Those are the ones we always want, I think. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Is that an adaptation of a crime novel, or is it an original piece of work? I think it's original. Yeah. Okay, well, but it's very... It's kind of brings together kind of contemporary true crime podcasting and that sort of Agatha Christie. Everybody's trapped in a house. Is there another show you'd like to write for outside? What would you after EastEnders or during EastEnders? We've talked before about my love of Doctor Who. I think that is my dream gig, really. And after kind of growing up watching sitcoms, Doctor Who came into my life in about 2006 with David Tennant and Billie Piper. And I've been hooked ever since, really. And I go through phases of how fervent a fan I am. But I think since David Tennant came back last year, it's really been something I've been engaging with daily, really. I find it such a great escape, so much fun. And in terms of genre as well, it just constantly plays with genre and expectations of what a TV show can do. So I think I would love to be involved in Doctor Who in some capacity, which I do think of as a continuing drama as well. It is that sci-fi show, but I think the Doctor is a fantastic protagonist who is 60 years old in terms of terrestrial television time, but obviously thousands now, I suppose. So being involved in telling a little bit of that story will be very dreamy indeed. What about you? Is there another show? Oh, I completely agree. I'd love to do that. I would like to have a go, as I say, at a good studio sitcom. Yeah, which there isn't. There isn't really one at the moment. It feels like it, just as a form, the sitcom feels like it's not there in quite the same way. And I feel and potentially fear, but I don't know whether it is a fear, that if a studio sitcom comes back, it might have to be about a studio sitcom. Just that feels like the only way it might get made is if it's a bit meta and reflective and talks about the old-fashioned nature of making work that way. Because it feels like such an old-school way of making comedy. But I think it lasted so long because it works as well. And of course, tastes change, and I hope that the studio sitcom will be like vinyl, that it will just come back round and it has that renaissance and people fall in love with it again. Yeah. What advice would you give for someone who wants to write on these shows? Obviously, we've given loads of advice in the last 40 minutes, but is there anything else that you would, or the one thing they should remember?
Yeah, reflecting on that interview process and hearing what you said about your interview process as well. I think really making sure you love those shows, watching them, knowing the characters, having lots of ideas for them, a sense of what you might want to bring to it, what you can bring to it, why you want to join that conversation, why you want to be part of that team, I think is a really, really important thing. I think making sure you've cultivated that sense of time management and that you're there in your development as a writer, that you can honour deadlines, you can receive notes, you can action those notes relatively speedily. I think that has really, really been beneficial to me working on continuing drama. And enjoy it, because it is such a pleasure. I think that first one that I wrote, as I said, I couldn't really get over that idea of I'm writing for an audience of millions, and so the process became really angst-inducing. I thought after that process, if that is the only episode I get, if that's the only time I do it, I'm disappointed that I went in with that energy. As opposed to being excited by that prospect, millions of people get to see this amazing, let's play. I let it straitjacket me a little bit. And so if you ever get in those rooms, you ever get those opportunities, just remembering this is what your 10-year-old self dreamt of and you're doing it, I think that feels really, really important as well. So relish it. Be good at time management, cultivate that aspect of your craft and your discipline, and make sure you know those shows and love those shows and have a sense of what you can bring to them. What would you say? What would be your advice?
Well, you've covered an awful lot there. I would have said several of those things. I would stress again the importance of the kind of duff moment. I think that's useful to think of in whatever you're writing, just kind of leaving a scene at the climax rather than the anticlimax.
Great.
Or just having a scene stop because you've had enough. There's got to be something change between the beginning of the scene and the end of the scene. Don't resolve everything. Make us want to come back in the next scene after the break. Just if you have a lot of scenes where at the end of it there's a question or something unresolved, as long as you don't confuse us for the whole thing, that's a great watch. Just makes you keep watching the next one and the next one, and think about what your voice is. I guess, what can I bring to these shows? Don't write scenes that you've seen on TV. Write scenes from life. There's a book I read called Here Comes the Kicker, and I think there's a writer in that where it's about comedy, and and he talks to all kinds of people like Judd Apatow and people who've made some great comedy. And I think somebody talks about the idea of idiot bait, which is a scene that you only ever see on TV, and then someone else writes the same scene, and it just kind of keeps coming round and around and around. Don't do that. Yeah. Write what only you can do.
I think that's really important to stress, certainly with continuing drama, because lots of people assume if you're writing on other people's shows and writing other people's characters, that your own voice gets a little bit lost. You have to learn the house standard voice, if you like. And to some extent, you learn the rhythms of characters and you feed that into your writing. But you get the job because they want you, not just another writer. They could give the job to anyone and they've chosen you. So you've got to keep hold of what is yours, what you can do, and make sure that seeps into the work. I think that is really important to stress.
Absolutely. There's a story department and a script editor who will protect you and make sure that you are keeping up with serial and the voice of this character and you're kind of being consistent. Yeah. So take some risk.
I think, as we've said as well, that might be why we're drawn to bringing jokes in, because a sense of humour feels so personal and yet communal at the same time. But that wry view on the world is so ours. If you are a person who uses humour, sees the world through funny eyes, that is so unique and distinct that bringing jokes to a soap feels like a great way of popping your stamp on it as well. And saying this way of seeing the world, that this character might also see the world in that same way, allows you to kind of sow your voice through the episode, I suppose.
Well, I think we have to end things there. Thanks, James. It's been nice to chat to you.
Lovely to chat to you too, and thank you for your nice questions.
A big thank you to Stephen Keyworth and James McDermott for their time.
If you have any questions or you want to get in touch, you can find us at Writers Centre on Twitter and Instagram. We're on Facebook, and you can sign up to the NCW newsletter at nationalcentreforwriting.org.uk.
As a UK registered charity, we rely on the generosity of our supporters to make our work possible. You can make a donation over on the website today by clicking the Support Us button.
And if you enjoyed what you heard today, please do consider subscribing to the podcast and leaving a 5-star rating and a review, because this helps other writers to find us.
Thanks again, keep writing, and Holly and I will catch you on the next episode.